Okay, I hope you can share. I hope you can see my screen. Let me put it in presentation mode. Okay, let me pop out the chat so I can kind of keep an eye on things. Let me know if there's any technical problems. So I'll be watching the chat as much as I can. Well, like I said, thank you for joining me for part one of this two-part series this afternoon. So today we'll be focusing mostly on the LOMA and the MTEZ form. Tomorrow we will talk more about the LOMR-F and the MT1 application. So in this picture, you can see that this is a building that was constructed on fill. So fill is altering the floodplain. When we add fill to it, we're changing it. So we're changing the map. So for that reason, if fill was put in before the area was mapped into the special flood hazard area, then we can treat it as natural grade. If it was added in after it was mapped into the special flood hazard area, then it's considered fill. And with that, we have to file a LOMR-F with the MT1 form. So the date of the fill pad has a lot to play in determining whether we can file for a LOMA or a LOMR-F. Okay, so which form do we use? So we're talking about two forms with the LOMA and LOMR-F. So this is the MTEZ. It's a little bit easier, which is why people like to use it, even in the wrong situations. This is only for a LOMA, and it's only for a LOMA that's residential, so not a commercial property, and a LOMA that is not in the floodway. If it's the floodway, we have to use the MT1 form. If it's for multiple properties, we have to use the MT1 form. So if you're planning on filing a LOMA for multiple properties, it may be easier to just file them all separately rather than using the multiple property method. It may actually end up being less paperwork for you to do them separately. So again, we'll be focusing on the MTEZ and the LOMA today, and then we'll cover the LOMR-F tomorrow. And so expiring forms, the current MTEZ and MT1 forms actually expired in 2014. They were released in 2012 and then expired. So you'll want to go onto the website and check that there is no new version before you get started on a project with one of these forms. So FEMA usually doesn't release a new version of a form right away. And so these are quite out of date. So that's why we want to check every time before we start a new project, especially if you're a person that likes to save the forms onto your computer. Just go ahead and check. But they have this note on their website that MTEZ 1 and 2 forms can be used until further notice. So use these forms when completing your letter of map change application. And we do want to submit them electronically. FEMA encourages people to use their electronic submission site instead of doing it through postal mail. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but mostly postal mail is really slow. So we don't want to use that. It's also more expensive. Okay, so the MTEZ form, so this is the first part of it, so for number one, has fill been placed on the property to raise the ground above the base flood elevation? So again, I covered this on the first slide, but if it was mapped into the floodplain after the fill was placed, then no, we can treat it like natural ground. So you can select no, and it's totally legal, even if it feels like you're lying. It's in the Code of Federal Regulations that we can treat fill that was in the floodplain before it was mapped like natural grade. And of course, if it was put in after it was mapped in, then you have to check yes, and that would be a LOMR-F, and they tell you to stop here, please complete the MT1 form for a LOMR-F. So that's important to keep in mind. And then for number two, we have the legal description of the property. So we have the street address and all this other information that should be on the deed. So it should be pretty easy to find. And then we can use abbreviations, the abbreviated description from the deed. So that's pretty simple. There may be issues with places that are under construction. Before they have an official address, they don't have that 911 registered address. Sorry, my attendance just popped up. Okay. So we're using the lowest adjacent grade to get you out of the floodplain. So are you requesting a flood zone determination to be completed for a structure or be illegally recorded property? So you can use a meets and bounds description and take out a portion of the property instead of just a structure. So that might be a good option. Say if you had a 2-acre property and just the back of it was in the floodplain and not the entire thing, then you could do a meets and bounds description to get the 1 acre out that's in front, and then you would be able to build on that portion of the property within that description without having any more problems or needing to file any additional paperwork. So it can be more complicated to do a meets and bounds description, but it might be worth it in the long run. And then you also have the option of taking out the entire legally recorded property if it's all high enough. But yeah. So this is further down, we have the applicant's information. So your name, address, and then it says your email address is optional, but we don't consider it optional just because it's so much easier to resolve issues and have all your communication done electronically rather than postal mail. Because if it's postal mail, they have to write you a formal letter, mail it out, then you get that letter, and then you have to send something back, and that entire exchange may take up to a week, and it might be especially slow now during the holiday season with COVID and the new strains coming out. So it's just much easier to save a lot of time doing things through email and electronic submission. So this is not a difficult form. So for the first one, a structure located on natural ground. Oh, hi, Steve. I see you were able to join. So you have the lowest adjacent grade. And if it's higher than the base flood elevation, then the base flood is not going to flood it, and you should be able to get the LOMA approved. For the parcel or portion, some people may have issues trying to get the entire property out. So it's usually easier to get just a portion of it out. So you have the property description, again, abbreviated underneath that from the deed. So the tax parcel number, property tax forms, and all of that information should be with the community. The block and lot numbers. So some areas in rural communities may not have that, or the street address might be different. So you'll have to get that cleared up. And then after that, they have the street address again, and then what type of construction do you have? So it's going to be really important with the LOMR-F. So they want to know if you're building a crawl space or a slab on grade, or you're taking out a basement or other type. So you'll have to explain that. And then after that, the coordinate data. So we need this to the 5th decimal place. So definitely 5 decimal places, 4 is going to be an error and it's not going to get approved. You'll have to get that corrected. But it's also the same for elevation certificates. So they used to be 4 and then they changed them to 5. And so on a meets and bounds, we're going to be taking this from the upstream edge. We're always using the upstream edge of everything that we're measuring pretty much, especially for base flood elevations. Yeah, it matters a little bit more for meets and bounds. And then the datum, definitely don't forget the datum. They need to be the same as they are on the map. Everything must be in the same datum, even if it has to be converted. We cannot be mixing datums because everything will be off if we don't. And then, so here's the map information after that for number 4. We need the NFIP community number and the map and panel number. So you probably know where to find this. It's on the firm. So here's an example of that. The community number is a 6-digit number. It's in the middle of the title block. So I have this firm panel and it gives me Shawnee County and Topeka. So this would be the map for Topeka. So that's my community number. And then the map and panel numbers towards the bottom, 20177. C is for county-wide, 0193E, and that's the full number. So we don't want to see any abbreviations, like towards the top where it says panel 193 out of 450. That's an abbreviation. We need the full number. And then the E at the end of that is a suffix. It tells you how many times it's been revised. So on the elevation certificate, it has a separate box. Here, it'll be all together in the one map and panel number slot. You can also find this information on the community status book. At least the community number, you can find that in the community status book. So you just look it up, and then you usually find Kansas on page 2. So you open that up and it has a PDF of all the communities in Kansas alphabetically, and then the first column to the left is the community number. And then we need the base flood elevation and the source of that base flood elevation. So there are a couple ways to go about this. So I will go through the calculation of a base flood elevation based on a paper map. And then I will go into how we get base flood elevations for approximate A zones that don't have a flood insurance study or a detailed study. So this is for Butler County. Like I said, this is an older paper map. A lot of communities in Kansas still have paper maps. I think it's easier to do if you have digital, but it's okay if you have paper maps. We're working to get everyone paper maps with our mapping team. So if we're looking at this specific property, I've gone to Google Maps and we just make a basic street map of it so we can pinpoint our location. And I like Google Maps because they have a measuring tool right there in the software. So it's easy to use a measure distance tool so that we can pinpoint our location on our firm panel or our ferment. So I'll also go through the process for making a ferment, but for now, you can see between the two meanders. So comparing my Google map to the firm panel, you can see the two meanders where this site is located specifically. It's between cross sections L and M that you can see. So M is the upstream cross section, so that's going to be important. And then we're also using L to pinpoint that location more exactly. So once I've gotten my Google Street Map, I can use that distance measure tool and then measure from somewhere like a cross section and maybe a couple other streets to measure that distance and how it's situated in that property specifically. And then I can measure the same distance using my ferment to pinpoint that location on my firm panel. So if I do that, then I can put a little dot there and we can just pretend that that's absolutely perfect. But you also want to notice the squiggly lines on the firm panel. They are rounded off base flood elevations, and that's going to be important later. But basically, we don't want to use those. We don't want to see them used. We can't really use them. They're to help give you a good idea, but that's not a properly calculated base flood elevation. We have to be more specific than that. So now that I have my property marked off on the firm or the ferment, so if you do print out your ferment, just make sure that you are printing it in the same size that you saved it in, or you hit actual size in your printing settings, because we don't want to distort the scale. Otherwise our measurements will be off. So make sure that you do that. So yeah, like I said, this is the older way. We still have paper maps. Again, I can go through an electronic version with you. I have recordings of that and I'll be doing some more next month. So two different ways of doing it. This is the older paper method. So I've colored a string pink so that you can see it a little bit easier. And then what I've done is laid it across the stream channel between L and M so that the end of the string lines up with cross section L, and then lay it carefully across the stream line all the way up to M. And then we've put a black mark there. And of course, I've got my property marked off with the X. So what we're looking at is the distance between the upstream cross section M and the upstream corner of my property on the X. And we're going to follow the stream channel to measure that distance. And then I'm going to come down to where it looks like the upstream corner of my property is perpendicular to the line, to the stream line. So we're going to be as careful as we can, and we're going to measure that distance. And so once we know what that is, I will go to the flood insurance study. So this is just kind of showing you that some of our engineers, people we work with, will measure straight instead of following the stream channel, because they say overbank flooding actually just flows straight across the land instead of following the actual stream channel, but that's not the official FEMA method of measuring it. So we're going to follow the FEMA method and use the stream channel. So it doesn't matter as much in this example. It's pretty straight and it's not that far. But if you were between a different cross section with a meander, then you should be measuring along that meander. So when we do measure this distance, we're about a third of the way down between L and M. So then I'm going to go to the flood insurance study, and then I'm going to flip to the back. So these are the flood profiles. So each of the stream will have its own flood profile. This is like the map represented in a more graphical form. So I'm going to find my two cross sections that I'm looking at, L and M. So another thing to remember is that I think all of the flood profiles run right to left. That is, the right side is upstream and the left side is downstream. So it's a little bit counterintuitive to our instinct of reading left to right. So that's something to be aware of. So there are 6 boxes between L and M. And since our distance is about a third of the way downstream of cross section M, that's going to be about 2 boxes down. So I'm going to put a mark there, and that's our property. And then I'm going to drag that line all the way up vertically through the stream bed and then up into the flood profiles. So the horizontal line that you see running in the middle of that line around 1260, that's the stream bed. So when you get all the way up, those are the different flood frequencies. So they have the 10, the 50, the 100, and the 500-year flood frequencies on here. And then they have a legend that shows you which ones are which. There are different patterns of broken lines. So you just drag it all the way up, and then you find where your property line intersects with the 100-year flood frequency, and then you take a diagonal line or a horizontal line from that intersection all the way across to the elevation in feet, and then that gives you your base flood elevation. If you look at the elevation in feet, there's 10 boxes between 1270 and 1280. So it's 1 foot per line, and we're just a little bit above the 8th box there. So we're calling it 1278.2. So there is a little bit of variation and a little bit of judgment call on this, and it might vary between the different methods that people use, but it should be pretty close. And so some of our floodplain administrators are not comfortable calling this 1278.2. They might round it up and call it 1278.5 just because it's a little bit above the 8th box. So it's a little bit above 1278. We don't want to call it 1278.0 because that would be wrong. So it's always good to be safe. So rounding it up just a little bit would be fine. We're fine with that. And it's not that expensive for them to elevate another 0.3 of an inch, and it might actually keep water out of their house in a flooding situation. So that is fine. If it was a little bit above halfway through that box, we might call it 1279.0. Also fine. It should be very close. And then we can check our work by going to the floodway data tables. So these are closer to the front of the flood insurance study. So you want to find the floodway data for Dry Creek, which is our flooding source that we're looking at. Now I can find cross section L and M. So we go over to the regulatory column. So this is under the 1% annual chance flood regulatory, which is what we regulate to. So M is 1279.0 and L is 1277.4. So 1278.2 is between those two numbers. So if we get something outside of that range, then we've done something wrong and we need to go back and check on that and fix that problem. I have gotten a really out there number before, and I was either looking at the wrong profile or the wrong data table. So just go back and double check that is the base flood elevation that you calculated reasonable. And there's a lot of other valuable information in the floodway data tables. So in this example, we look at the elevation certificate for this property actually, mostly to look at what happened to B9. It says 1277. So if you recognize that from the firm panel, they just took that downstream rounded off number with the squiggly lines. So I see a question in the chat. Are the flood insurance studies available online? Yes, they are. They're in the FEMA Map Service Center, and I will be showing you where that is in just a couple slides. So yeah, they didn't measure this. They didn't crack open the flood insurance study at all. So if we see this, it needs to be corrected, whether you're filling it out for someone or if you're reviewing these, we need to see within 1/10 of an inch. So the problem here is if we see the top of the bottom floor, 1278.1, and we know the correct base flood elevation is much closer to 1278.2, then they're already 1/10 of a foot below the base flood elevation. And since we have a freeboard of 1 foot requirement here in Kansas, there are 1.1 foot too low to be compliant with floodplain regulations. So that's a big problem. And from what I understand, this was a house that had an increased cost of compliance claim, an ICC claim, part of their flood insurance claim, that gives you up to $30,000 to help bring your house into compliance. And this wasn't brought into compliance. It's still too low. I don't know how low it was before this happened. But we do have the option of attaching an elevation certificate to a LOMA request to support that. And then we just don't fill in the rest of the MTEZ form. So this is a problem. And if you're able to see in the smaller print for C2F, the lowest adjacent grade is 1274.5. So if they were eligible for a LOMA, this could fix all of this and take them out of the floodplain and not have a compliance issue, but that is too low. So it's not going to work and they won't be eligible, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm not sure how that resolved, but not good for a LOMA. However, that is how we do base flood elevations with a detailed study. So we know what we should be looking for or filling out. And if you don't have the detailed study, if we're working in an approximate A zone, we have a couple options for getting a base flood elevation. So the first place you should probably check is our Kansas BFE portal. So there's the link to it. So you just register for this site, you sign up and log in, and then you're able to go to the map and look at properties. You can look at LiDAR for them. You don't have to fill out a request, but our office will reply to your request within 5 days if you submit a request for a base flood elevation. So on this page, it'll show you where our data is available. So it's a lot of Kansas. We're about 2 years out from having base level engineering for all of Kansas and be able to fill out requests from anywhere in the state. So this is not survey accurate, but it will definitely tell you if you have a good chance of getting a LOMA. It's plus or minus a foot of error. So tall grass or something like that can skew the numbers, but it will help you get at least an idea. If you don't submit a full request, it will show you the LiDAR value when you draw a polygon around a structure. So that's what it looks like on the left-hand side where it gives you the LiDAR value. And then your area of interest there, that's the polygon that you draw with the drawing tool. So you can just use the find address search bar, type that in, and then find the address. So again, you can do this without submitting a full request, but you just search for the address, you find it, and then you carefully draw around the footprint of the building as closely as you can with the polygon drawing tool. So trace the boundary, and then if you do want to submit a request, you just fill out this little information box. So it has the address and what your purpose is for making the request, and then you just hit save, and it says thank you, DWR will be in touch. Like I said, we have a 5-day turnaround time on that, and it usually doesn't take that long. So we have someone in our office look at all of these, or it's not an automated system. So this is what the letter looks like that you get. This is an example, and here's the zoomed in on that language. So you get all the information, you have your base flood elevation, it tells you the property, your zone. Of course, we're looking for this for a Zone A approximate, nothing with a flood insurance study or a detailed study. Then we have other resources for calculating the base flood elevation. Yeah, this is for approximate A zones. You see the map and panel number, the effective dates, the base flood elevation, and the lowest adjacent grade for the property. So this can be attached to the LOMA paperwork, and then the source would be DWR, us as the state. And again, this will help you get out of the mandatory purchase requirement if you get a LOMA. This no longer helps with premiums or anything to do with flood insurance rates. That is completely on the new risk rating 2.0 system. So it used to be if you got out of the floodplain with a LOMA or a LOMR-F, it would help you qualify for a preferred risk policy, but those are no longer the case. We don't do those anymore. So there's kind of a split up between floodplain management and insurance now. If we don't have the data available to do a BFE request, usually somewhere out in Western Kansas, then you could get one from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So this is like a $350 charge, which is why you should check for us first with the BFE portal. It's a free service. So this is about $350 unless they've done something around there recently where they have a base flood elevation nearby. But these letters are accepted. FEMA accepts more DWR and USACE determinations than those done by individual surveyors or engineers. So this is how to get in touch with them. I couldn't find a more updated version of this fact sheet. I put in our new address and information, but if you have trouble getting in contact with someone like this, let me know. I can probably help you find it. But again, most of Kansas is covered and we're about 2 years out from having that base level engineering done. So yeah, definitely check with the BFE portal first. And then just to go back to risk rating 2.0 a little bit. So it used to be we'd have these rate tables where we could tell you what your premium would look like based on your lowest floor elevation compared to the base flood elevation. Now that's only one part of the equation. So if you see on the left FEMA mapping data, that would be your base flood elevation and that kind of thing. So now they're factoring all these other different variables. So different data sources from government agencies, catastrophe flood models, your replacement cost data, your past claims, and there's just all the stuff that goes into it. So we can't really tell anyone what their premium is going to be like. If they want to know, they're going to have to work with a flood insurance agent and go through hypothetical retrofit or hypothetical new construction to get that kind of information. We are able to tell them a little bit about mitigation discounts. So if you elevate your machinery to a certain height, depending on what kind of structure you have, you can get 5% off. If you have proper flood venting in the appropriate foundations, you can get between 3 and 27% discount. And if you have a high enough lag and your first floor height is high enough, and you have a foundation type that's more conducive to not flooding, like diagram 5, elevated without an enclosure, something like that. They're not, we're not completely clear on how exactly that works because everything will be weighted differently depending on your other variables, but that's the information that we have. The higher you build, the better off you're going to be from flooding and from a premium perspective. So LIDAR at DASC, that is the Data Access and Support Center website. So they have lots of really good GIS shapefiles and other types of data that's publicly available about Kansas. It's very handy. And then we have our LIDAR data on here. So this is from 2018, and then 1/3 of the counties were reflown last year, which that should become available pretty soon. We have to refly the LIDAR every so often just to keep it updated, because if we change something like adding lanes to a highway, that will change the LIDAR. So if you have questions about LIDAR information or questions about a base flood elevation request that was submitted or something, these are the people in our office that you should be contacting, or I will direct you to them. So Joanna, Bill, and Tara are our mapping team. Again, they are working diligently to get everybody a digital map. So this is our state floodplain viewer. It's kind of like the National Flood Hazard Layer or the MSC digital parts, but this is more state specific. So the map here, the counties outlined in green have effective digital maps. So the layers appear here. You can turn on and off layers. It's really helpful. And then, so if you, again, I have approximate A zones, then we have added in the cross sections that were used to make the approximate A zone part of the map. So we made them available here because they are good enough data to create the maps. So they're good enough as best available data. They can be found here and then be used by surveyors in support of a LOMA or paperwork. So if you look on the left-hand side of the panel, there's a print option. So if you click on that, it'll create kind of the state version of a format for you. So this map can be attached to your paperwork with a request. So yeah, you can send this with the LOMAs. So this is an area in Lawrence that I've found. So I've circled in the legend that this is an approximate A zone, and then you can see the cross sections there. So you can use this. What's important is the disclaimer on the bottom right that this was developed by our department. So that needs to be visible so the reviewers know where this data came from, and then the surveyor can explain their work and how the base flood elevation was calculated using this information, such as if they used 50% of the number, then they added it to the downstream number or something like that, whatever the methodology is, and then attach it to the request. So this is here on our state floodplain viewer available for surveyors to use. So one other consideration is that some properties are in an area where elevations may overlap. If you're in an area where two streams converge, then you are vulnerable to either one of them. So we need to calculate two base flood elevations and then use the higher one. We did have an engineer that came in and then they just wanted to use the lower one, even though they saw this convergence issue and they submitted it and it got rejected. So we do have to look at the higher numbers for that, a situation like that. So yeah, we are adding new maps every year. I'm working with communities right now to get their new maps adopted. So again, you can see this on our state floodplain viewer. So here's another map of all the watersheds and where they are in the projects that they're working on. We will have digital firms for everyone eventually. And here's another one county by county. So this is from December 4th of last year. So this is actually a little bit out of date. Like I said, I'm working with some of these communities that have moved on past their prelim stage to adopt their maps. So we are working on it. And some of you are still on paper, which is why I go through paper examples of things. Okay, so the next part of the MTEZ, section 5, so the lowest adjacent grade to the structure, again, nearest 1/10 of a foot, we need that. So this is the elevation information of the MTEZ. So how high is that by survey? So the lowest adjacent grade is where the foundation will be touching the ground and potentially touching floodwater, depending on how high it is. So if it's higher than the BFE, you get a LOMA. This is also where you'd put it in for the meets and bounds description. That is the one bullet point right underneath that. Again, don't forget the datum. We have to have the datum in there and we don't want to see them mixed up. So they need to match up with the map information. And then has FEMA identify the area as subject to land subsidence or uplift? So we don't have any uplift areas in Kansas. We do have subsidence areas in Cherokee and Reno counties from salt and coal mining. So if you're doing work for one of those areas, it might be a good idea to narrow down where exactly that is happening. And then the certifier's information goes in here and then they sign and seal it. But more about lowest adjacent grade. So yeah, this is where the dirt is touching the cement, and for a building with window wells, presumably with a basement, that's going to be the bottom of the window well. And then we have truck ramps here. So for a LOMA, the intervening higher ground can potentially help with an application. It may help them overlook the lowest adjacent grade being at the bottom of a window well, depending. I did have a surveyor tell me recently that for the truck ramp situation, so it's like on the bottom right, we have a raised slab on grade building. So the truck bed lines up with the top of the floor. So at the bottom of that slab is the lowest adjacent grade, and then the ramp slopes upward, and that's the potential intervening higher ground. So I've heard recently that they don't like that because they consider that concrete or that cement to be man-made material, and so they don't consider it as natural grade for a LOMA. So that might depend who's reviewing it for a LOMA. So I mean, it should be considered natural grade. Just if it was fill that was put in before it was mapped into the special flood hazard area, or if it's just naturally occurring that way. But that's just what I've heard. So yeah, we can do our best to explain this. Here's some photographic examples of that truck ramp type of thing with the sloping up intervening higher ground, and then window wells that are made out of a couple of different materials. So we have an aluminum window well, and then a poured cement window well that looks fancy. It has plexiglass over it to keep water out, but that doesn't change the fact that the lowest adjacent grade is at the bottom of that window well. And that doesn't change it. But what might help is providing a sketch like this. So this is a sketch of a building that has window wells, and they explain the lowest adjacent grade and then the higher intervening grade around that. And then they just provide a detailed explanation so that the reviewer can really make sense of what's going on and determine that the base flood elevation is not going to reach that high. It won't reach the top of the window well, so it should be safe from flooding, and this LOMA was approved. So this is different with a LOMR-F. We don't look at intervening higher ground. That's not a thing. So that's something to be mindful of. And then additional documentation. So they provide this checklist to make sure that you have everything that you need and you can avoid delays. So that's really helpful to have. So we need a copy of the effective firm panel. So I'm going to go through the firm and the firmettes, how to make them and find them. And then a copy of the subdivision plat map. So tax assessors maps, usually from the GIS office in the city. All of the maps need to have a map scale and a north arrow so they can be properly oriented, and then a copy of the property deed from the recorder's office. So you make sure you have all of that, and then it should be okay to submit with the application. So if we're looking at that, we should look at firms. So this is like a zoomed in version of the firm panel, and then it includes all this important information that we need, like the north arrow, the scale bar, and then the map and panel number here. And it shows us what zone we're in clearly. So the firm panel is too big for an area of interest usually, so we need to have this smaller version. So you can see all the floodplain zones here. So they are delineated by the blue lines, the blue dots inside of it. All of that is floodplain. And then the diagonal striping area is the floodway. So we wouldn't be using the MTEZ for anything in the floodway, only LOMAs outside of them. So if you have a digital map, you can use this address search bar. It's pretty simple. You just type it in. You might add in the zip code. That might help narrow it down and pinpoint the location more exactly if you have issues just typing in the address by itself. If you don't have a digital map, you'll use the search all products function. So it's just a little bit longer. It's not difficult though. So again, there might be issues with street names that are new. With all this new construction, they're not all updated that frequently. So that might be something to watch out for. So here I've typed in my office address in Topeka. So I just typed it in. I didn't even need the zip code. It just took me right to the office building, and it's given me a little red pin where my office is, and it has all the information that I would need. City of Topeka, it's got that community number there. It's got the full map and panel number, the effective date. We're adjacent to the floodplain, but you can see it just to the east of us, all of the different zones and everything. So this is pretty descriptive, and this will work as a ferment if I like it. So I can just hit dynamic map there in the middle of the screen. Just click on that, and then it'll generate this national flood hazard layer ferment. So it's kind of similar to the state ferment. But yeah, it's nice. I have the legend. I have all the floodplain information. Say if I was in the floodplain, then it would be very clear. I've got all the cross sections of my zone, and I've got a scale bar at the bottom, a representative fraction, and then a north arrow in the legend. So this is nice, and this will work. I could attach this to a LOMA request. So if we don't have digital maps, then we will hit the search all products. Steve, I will use the search all products option. And so you just go to the drop-down menu, hit Kansas, and then for the county, your applicable county. And then for community drop-down, it will show you all the communities that have flood maps in that county. So I have clicked on Topeka. So then it'll take you here and it'll show you all effective products. So one of those effective products will be your flood insurance study. So it's usually listed underneath firm panel somewhere. So you'd want to go here and you just download the flood insurance study, and it'll all be together in one document. So it's convenient. You just download that. And then for firm panels, I have 35 in this specific example. So I need to narrow down what firm panel I need to make a ferment out of. So I'm going to go to the index, which is at the top of the list. So it's 20177. Again, C for county wide, and then IND is for index. So all I have to do is hit view that. Same thing in this example, we have 95 firm panels, so even more. I'm still going to use the index. So here's the one for Lawrence. So this is like a general map, like a highway map, and it's basically a map of where all the firm panels are. So City of Lawrence, it should be easy for me to narrow it down. I have the railroad going diagonally down through the entire community. I have the Kansas River at the top, the city boundaries. And then if you look, there's like a polygon on the right that has a long strip, and then there's a couple areas off to the left. So that's actually our airport. It was annexed by the city, so it's outside the city limits, but it's part of the city technically as our airport. So there's hangars off to the left, and then that strip part is actually the runway for the airplane. So if someone was telling me that they were, if they were constructing something just northeast of the airport, I would probably look at that particular panel 20045C0089D. So I can look at 0089D and then just look through my list here and then find that number. And then I should be able to view it, and then I'll be able to zoom in and make a ferment out of that. So, and these are the newer style maps. So I just hit create a ferment. So it'll take me to this menu. Again, be mindful of what page size you save it in. So 8x11 is pretty standard, and that's usually like the default printing option, but just make sure you're conserving your scale if you are going to print it out. So I select the size and then I hit next, and it says select print area. So I'm going to drag that green box over my area of interest, like over my office building. And once I have that situated, I'll hit next, and then the scale and north arrow. So that grayed out box that's over my scale and north arrow will turn green as well. Then I can move and adjust that how I like. Then I hit next, and the box over the title box will turn green, and I can adjust it. And then once I hit next, I can just preview the ferment, so then I can go back and make adjustments, or I can download it. So you hit save, and then you can download it in PDF or PNG file formats. PDF is usually easier if you need to send them out to multiple people. But then you just download it and then you have this and you can come back to it. You can attach it to, again, the LOMA paperwork, of course, you can also attach it to permits, and they're just really handy to have for an area that you're working with. So here's what it looks like. Again, it looks different from the National Flood Hazard Layer. It's these blue lines and blue dots again, but it has all the information that I need. And again, this is the newest style of flood mapping with the National Flood Hazard Layer. It's colored this way to help people with color blindness to better discern that color. And then we also have the LOMA out as shown determination. So this is another type of LOMA, and this is for a property owner that's outside of the special flood hazard area. Usually their property's outside, but their lender is still requiring flood insurance because they have determined that they are in. So it's important to keep in mind that lenders can still require flood insurance no matter what. That's their prerogative. So it needs to be worked out whether the mandatory purchase requirement is related to that or just the floodplain determination. So if it is just the floodplain determination and they want to come out of that mandatory purchase requirement, then this is what we do. So we have properties 3414 and 3412 that are circled on the map. So the structure is out of the floodplain, but the backyard has some in it. So the flood zone determination companies that are often used by lenders have computer programs, and they might just flag a property for having floodplain if any part of the floodplain intersects with their legal description. And then that imposes the mandatory purchase requirement, even though the structure, when we look at the map, is clearly outside of the floodplain, which is why we call it out as shown. So then they just follow these instructions. It's pretty easy. I do have a handout on it if you'd like to see it. So yeah, you don't need an elevation certificate or that kind of information because it's clearly outside of the floodplain altogether, which is why a property owner could do this if they want to. So you just have page 1 of the MTEZ form filled out, and then you attach the deed and the ferment, which we know how to make now, and the appraiser's map or the map from the GIS department, again with scale, bar, and north arrow on it. And that should clearly all show it being out of the floodplain, and then they should get the determination. So again, that's everything we need, and I do have the instructions on that if you'd like to see it. So if you already have an elevation certificate, then we don't need to pay a surveyor to do any other office work or anything. It can be attached to the EZ form, and then we just leave the lines blank that ask for that elevation information since it's already on the elevation certificate. So this would be for a structure. The elevation certificate doesn't have a place to describe meets and bounds, so that wouldn't be part of it, but this is one option. Yeah, anyone can do that. And again, it's much faster and advised by us and FEMA to use the online submittal system. It works well. Again, it's a lot faster. If you're doing any other kind of letter map change, there's a fee associated with that. And then there's going to be an additional $100 for them to scan everything and then forward it to their engineer reviewer. So it's just much better and faster to use the electronic system. I have had a few surveyors that want to hold out and use the postal system for whatever reason, but like I said, it's much slower. So it's better to do that. And then LOMAs don't stop flooding. They're not magical barriers. Neither are floodplain barriers or floodplain lines. People have this sense of security getting a LOMA or being outside the floodplain, but larger floods happen and they are going to continue to happen. So we always want to encourage people to get flood insurance, look into flood insurance, talk to them about mitigation discounts if we can. So I know there is that separation between insurance and floodplain management, but we do what we can to try to keep people safe. Okay, so a few other resources. Our floodplain page on our website is a good resource. We work with Don Masterson. He is assigned to Kansas, so he usually directs people to us. And then the FEMA Map Service Center, again, that's where you get your firm. You can make a firmette either with the National Flood Hazard Layer or the Search All Products function. And yeah, your flood insurance study is there. And then FEMA has a lot of really good publications. If you are looking for guidance on something specific, let me know. I should be able to pull up something. But yeah, if you just do a search for FEMA and certain topics, it should be able to pull up the library. They change their link a lot. So there's that. If you need benchmark information, there is the National Geodetic Survey number. Floodsmart.gov is another good resource. And then hopefully there's a good working relationship between the floodplain manager in the community and the surveying engineer community. It's really good to have that relationship, and hopefully they know each other and you can work together. We do have Steve doing a video demonstration of filling out an elevation certificate with a house model and showing all the different foundations and where information goes. So it's really good if you're a visual learner. And then we have the Army Corps of Engineers at the bottom. And then of course, here's my number, so. Okay. And that is that. I will stop sharing my screen.